stand next to your fire.
Hello there, my name's Raquel Goosey and that's me. You're probably wondering what I'm doing. I'm blowing glass. If you've never heard of it, you're probably not alone.
Glassblowing is actually one of the oldest forms of art. It is said that Venetian sailors started a fire on a beach to cook their food, and their fire melted the sand underneath it, making glass. Now, this isn't necessarily true, but it's a good story. Historians think that the basic formula for glass was invented around 2000 BC. In case you're wondering what that is, it's made of silicon dioxide, sand, potash, and lime, but not the kinds you eat. We'll get back to that later. In pre-Roman times, Mesopotamian and Egyptian craftsmen formed molten glass around cores of earth and dung. They sometimes added color to the glass, and once it cooled, they would pick out the cores. Now remember, you had to be a pretty big guy to own one of these. Only pharaohs and really rich people owned them because they were so difficult to make. Let's fast forward to around 300 BC to the invention of the blowpipe. With the invention of the blowpipe, craftsmen no longer had to shape their glass around dirt. That must have been such a relief. Also, they were able to make parazons they were completely unable to imagine beforehand. But wait, you don't know what a blowpipe is, do you? This is a blowpipe to do the actual blowing.
The blowpipes that we use today probably look a little bit different from the ones that people used in 300 BC, but they're still arguably the most important tool in glassblowing.
Okay, so now I'm sure you're wondering, these ancient dudes have blowpipes, but what did they do with them? The Romans were arguably the most influential people in all of glassblowing history, although some would say Venetians, but we'll get to those crazy Italians later. The Romans made glassblowing easy and widespread. They also got pretty fancy with their technique. Molds and gold inlay were invented by the Romans. The Romans were pretty cool cats, but unfortunately almost all of their progress was lost during the Dark Ages. Don't lose hope for glass, though. Around the 12th century, the Catholic Church gained control of Europe and glass production started again. However, during the Dark Ages, the focus of glassblowing had shifted. From the Middle Ages to modern day, Venice, Italy has been considered the glass-blowing capital of the world. From the 13th century to the 17th century, Venetian glassblowers were the only ones who knew how to make their craft. They also revolutionized glassblowing. They created many new techniques, including mirrors and cristallo, which is an especially bright and clear kind of glass. In 1291, the Venetian glassblowers actually moved to an island called Murano, a short gondola ride from the city, to better protect their craft. It was a crime punishable by death to leave Murano. It's pretty scary, right? Fortunately for the rest of the world, though, a few brave glassblowers were able to escape the island and share their secrets with the rest of the world. The beginning of the Renaissance marked the end of Murano's monopoly on glassblowing. In the early 1600s, the book L'arte di vetraria, The Art of Glassblowing, was published by Antonio Neri. This book contained all of the secrets that Italy had been so closely guarding, such as how to set up a studio, how to make glass, and even how to form and shape vessels. The cat was out of the bag. This book allowed glassblowing to move from Venice and into the rest of Europe. After the world got a hold of the secrets of glassblowing, a whole lot happened in not much time. Most of this progress was made using different kinds of glass.
First, in the early 17th century, Bohemian factories discovered a new kind of glass made mostly from chalk that was almost perfectly clear and easy to cut. This became much more widespread and coveted than Venetian glass, much to the masters' dismay. Factories in Spain, France, Germany, and the Netherlands, England, and Sweden then developed another kind of glass, this one with a greenish tinge that came from the wood ash that they used from their forested surroundings. This glass was used for making bottles and window glass. Unfortunately, for the glassblowers that relied on wood to make their glass, the trees near the studios began to run out. This forced glassblowers to use coal to make their glass, which led to the discovery of yet another type of glass. This new glass was called black glass for its dark green color, and it was used to make thick bottles for transport of goods. In 1676, George Ravenscroft discovered a way to make glass using lead. This leaded glass was extremely clear and stayed hot for much longer than other types of glass and was more durable as well. These attributes caused glassblowers to focus more on form than ornamentation. Now, most of the glass that you have in your household are made out of this sparkling leaded glass.
Whew, that was a lot of different kinds of glass for just 100 years. The face of glassblowing changed even more in the early 1800s. Along with the Industrial Revolution, tons of new machines were made to help glassblowing even more easy and accessible. In 1903, Michael Owens invented the automatic bottle blower, which could blow hundreds of light bulbs in a single day. Now that's a lot of light bulbs. Now that we've gotten to the point where glass is both easy to make and accessible to the public, we can talk about the fun stuff, the transition from utility to art. In the late 1800s, Emile Gall and Eugene Rousseau revolutionized the purpose of glass. They both designed and created the works of art that they made. Now this went against the factory format of the time where there was an artist and a craftsman. The work of Gall and Rousseau was popularized by the Paris exhibition of 1878. Their work was fluid and graphic and inspired by the Art Nouveau style of glass. About 100 years after Gall and Rousseau, the studio glass movement began. Glass artists like Harvey Littleton began moving out in the late 1960s to make their own glassblowing studios apart from the factories that characterized glassblowing at the time. These artists wanted to be free from the philosophies and styles enforced by the factories and wanted to explore all that glass had to offer. This movement is still very prevalent in the glassblowing world and is ever evolving. Baron Glassworks in Ypsilanti, the studio where I shot this video, is part of this movement.
Okay, I've talked a lot about the history of glassblowing, so now you know about how this great craft came about, but I bet you're just itching to learn how to actually blow glass. Unfortunately, you're not allowed on the bench just yet. You have to learn a few things about safety before we can do that. Know about glassblowing studios is that there are places where if you don't dress properly, you can end up with a third-degree burn or worse. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to show up to the glass studio dressed like this. But it also doesn't mean you should show up dressed like this. All of your clothing should be cotton or another natural material because synthetic materials like polyester will melt and stick to your skin. Also, they should be easy to move in and always wear closed-toed shoes. You don't want something to fall on your foot and get a serious burn. Next, you should always be aware of where you and other people are in the studio. This means you should never walk backwards and always warn people when you're behind them. It's a sad day when someone turns around with hot glass in their hands to find you standing there. Last but not least, you should be very careful about the tools that you handle. Everything that touches glass gets very hot, and if you aren't vigilant, you could get seriously burned by touching something that's usually fine to touch. This means never putting tools in your lap and being careful about watching when you're assisting somebody else, watching which tools that they use and picking them up carefully. Okay, now that you are in a safety hazard, I can give you a tour of the studio. To remind you, this is Baron Glassworks in Ypsilanti. Feel free to come on by anytime. This is the furnace. This furnace has been running for 14 years. It hasn't been turned off since 1998. It keeps the glass at toasting 300 degrees Fahrenheit day in and day out. This particular glass is called System 96 glass. This means that it has a coefficient of expansion of as it cools and heats up of 96. This loud cylindrical contraption behind me is called a glory hole. It's what you might call a reheating oven. It's a steel cylinder that's lined with a fire blanket, a kind of fabric that's made out of clay fibers. Into this basically a big torch is directed, which runs off of natural gas and air. The glory hole can get up to 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit. Now that is hot. Over here is the annealer. The annealer is basically a huge kiln that cools down the glass at a rate that's slow enough that it won't break. Were we to let our beautiful pieces air dry, they would just crack and shatter before we were able to fully enjoy them. This annealer makes it so that that doesn't happen. This is the grinder. We'll use this after we make our glass to grind the bottoms of our pieces to make them extra flat and finish them perfectly. I guess that concludes our tour. Since you know your way around the studio, there are still a few more things that you need to know before you get your hands on any glass. First, I'll talk to you about tools and materials. These tools here are the most basic tools that you will encounter as a beginning glassblower. Should you become pro, there are a lot more tools out there, but these are what you're going to be working with for now. This here is a blowpipe. What you do okay, sorry, you can stop it.
called molds. You can use molds. There are all different kinds of molds, and you can use them to make beautiful patterns in your glass, as well as change the shape of your bubble. Last but not least, this big slab of steel is called marker. It's the best shaping tool around, and you'll be using it all the time. So you already know this is the furnace. This is where you get 98% of your glass when you're blowing glass. In case you forgot, this glass is 3,000 degrees, and it is the hottest right out of the furnace as it ever will be when you blow glass. Here at Barron Glass, which we use cullet glass, this means that once a week or so we shovel in little nuggets of clear glass to melt and then be used to make art the next day. Other studios use batch, which means they actually mix ingredients to make glass in the furnace. This usually happens at studios that function on a much larger scale. This is what the glass looks like right out of the furnace. You can't really see it, but if you can't tell, all of it is clear. Okay, so you get most of your glass from the furnace, but that's clear, which is pretty boring. So we have ways to add color to our glass. Here we have what is called frit. Frit is small pieces of glass. This is iris green, and as you can see, it's a different color, and it's little pieces of glass. You would roll your clear glass into this to make your glass green. Frit comes in all different sizes. This frit here is number 2 frit, and it's much larger than number 00 frit, like this here. Now, there are all sorts of other sizes of frit, but in this studio we only use number 2 and 00. Frit isn't the only way to add color to your glass, however. You can also use powder, which is a lot like frit, but finer. This is powder, and as you may have guessed, it's basically just powdered glass. You use it in a similar way to the way you use frit, by just dipping your glass into it. But you can come up with a lot more different patterns in your glass. Now you're probably thinking that you know all there is to know about glass, but glass doesn't just vary by size of piece, it also varies by type. Now glass falls into 3 main categories: non-reducing, reducing, and striking. This here is non-reducing glass. It's just normal glass. It comes out the same color as it went in, although in a much more beautiful form. This here is reducing glass. Reducing glass has metal underneath the surface of the glass, and when you expose it to a certain kind of flame, the outer surface disappears and leaves this gorgeous metallic finish. The last kind of glass is striking glass. Striking glass is glass that changes colors at a certain temperature. Now this glass is striking glass. It's called chalcedony, and it's not only one color, but 3 or 4. See the greens and blues and browns? That came when it hit a certain temperature in the glory hole. When it started, it was all brown, but now it's all these different colors. Okay, now that you're experts on safety, the studio, tools, and materials, it's time that we can actually start blowing glass. You're going to have to start off slow. It's going to be a while until you're making rondelles or huge vases, but you have to start somewhere. The very first thing the beginning glass blowers need to know how to do is how to handle the tools, and how to get on and off the bench, and how to heat evenly. Oh, and also how to gather. But don't get discouraged. All of these things are encompassed in one simple exercise, the pole ball.
Let me walk you through making a pole ball. The first thing you'll need to do is gather, which is getting glass out of the furnace. The furnace is really hot. It's probably pretty scary right now, but have no fear. A good steady hand and even turning are all you need to get a perfect gather every time. Make sure you stand behind the door and let someone else hold it for you so you don't get cooked every time you need glass. The next thing you're going to need to do is marvering. Marvering is shaping your glass on the marver. Marvering is also mastered through even turning and a very light hand. The most important thing when blowing glass is constant turning. Because the glass is liquid, it has a tendency to drip off your pipe or punty. See, when I stop turning the glass, it sags off. Like in wheel throwing pottery, you always want your glass to be on center. This will mean that your final product is round and straight, and when you get to blowing that your walls are even as well as you heat. By turning constantly at a constant rate, you will keep your glass on center and will produce good glass. This, however, is not as easy as it sounds. It takes lots of practice and determination to perfect your turning. The next important skill you will learn when making a pole ball is how to make a jack line. In a normal situation, the jack line is what you will use to separate your piece from the pipe. In this case, it's what you'll use to make a decorative piece. To jack, you have to be very careful and think of the jacks as almost like your fingers. You squeeze down very lightly and let go sometimes to let the heat soak back out. Ta-da! I made a pole ball, but I think there were a few things that we might have missed while going through that exercise. Let's do it again. Okay, one thing we didn't talk about last time was posture. When blowing glass, you should always have your feet about shoulder width apart, and your hands should also be about the same. When you're carrying the glass, they should be farther apart than when you're marvering, where you should go to almost a third of the way down the pipe or punty, as seen here. Now let's talk a little bit more about marvering. Marvering is probably the most difficult skill that you will have to learn as a glass blower. It takes a lot of practice, and you won't be good at it when you first start. See how I start down low and go up high? That's like I'm squeezing the glass off of the punty because you want as much glass to work with as possible. You can also use marvering to shape your glass into a short or a long piece of glass. Did you see what I just did there? I got onto the bench, but I pushed my glass in front of me first. Getting on and off the bench is actually a very important skill to have because you could seriously injure yourself or someone else around you if you don't do it properly. Let's talk about tracking. When using the tools, it's important to track. This means following the glass with your tools. This will make your jack lines better as well as your shaping. If your tool isn't right in line with your piece, you can do some serious damage. See how I follow the piece with my jacks? That's exactly what I'm talking about. Heating is one of the most important things to pay attention to when blowing glass. Once you become more experienced, you'll be able to gauge the heat of glass better. But as a beginner glass blower, you should probably gauge how hot your glass is by how floppy it is, how well you can control it. See how floppy my glass was when I came over? You always want to work pretty hot so you can do the most work in one trip to the bench. Okay, now that we're done with the pole ball, why don't we go on to an actual hollow form? Let's do a cup. First, a recap. Okay, let's try making a simple drinking glass. To start off with, you're going to need to make a starter bubble. A starter bubble is made with just one gather, and it's a small mushroom cap-shaped bubble. This starter bubble will help make it easier when you want to go blow out the rest of your piece. Once you have your starter bubble, you need to wait before you gather again. You have to get your glass to a relatively cool temperature before you put hot glass over it, or everything will just kind of melt. Now remember all of the marvering and heating techniques that I taught you about earlier when you made a pole ball. They're still extremely important and very useful to you. Obviously, the newest thing about making a cup as opposed to a pole ball is the blowing. Now, when you blow glass, you don't want to blow from your stomach. You want to put pressure into the pipe. This may sound odd, but to know what I mean, hold some air in your mouth and blow it out as if you were spitting out water. This will make a pressurized stream as opposed to just blowing. When you're making a cup or any other blown vessel, you want to get your jackline in as soon as possible, as shown here. I get my jackline in before I do any sort of shaping, but I do blow a little bit. Try to alternate between blowing and jacking, but don't ever get into a set pattern, because you need to respond to the glass and not just follow steps. I talked a little bit about heating before, but I didn't give you any specific tips. When you heat, you want to heat behind the wall of the glory hole. This is where most of the heat is reflected, and it's a hot spot that will keep your jackline warm. Also, you need to flash every few seconds, which means putting your entire piece, especially your moil, which is the part where the glass is on the pipe, under the burner. Although behind the door is a good place to heat your piece on a normal basis, you can use the burner to get your piece extra hot when you want to. Just don't always hang out there. The next big difference in making a cup as opposed to a pole ball is that you will need to punty your piece before you're done with it. Puntying is when you use a punty to make a temporary holder for your piece. You break off your piece at the jack line so it is no longer connected to the pipe. Then you use your jacks to open up your piece and make a beautiful cup. Puntying is always done with a partner, as are many other things in glassblowing. Glassblowing is certainly an exercise in teamwork as well as individual craftsmanship. After you punty, you need to heat your piece up so that the bottom does not get floppy because you flattened it and you want it to stand up, but also hot enough that you can use the jacks to open it. When you use the jacks to open it up, you need to go into the piece at the same angle as the wall of the glass, otherwise you'll get some serious jack marks, which aren't that nice on a piece. This, like everything else, will take time to perfect and master. Look, we made a cup! Like I said before when we went on the tour, it is of the utmost importance once you make your piece to put it into the annealing oven so it will cool properly. Now that you've completed a pole ball and a cup, you're well on your way to being a glass blower. Just keep on practicing all of the techniques shown in this video, essential to being a good glass blower and to creating beautiful pieces. Of course, after watching this video, you aren't exactly a professional glass blower. If you really want to dedicate yourself to this craft, go to one of your local glassblowing studios. There's more than us than you think, and enroll in classes today. Thanks for watching and happy glassblowing from Barron Glassworks in Ypsilanti, Michigan.